The snow fell silent over Germantown, North Carolina. On Christmas morning, 1929, the kind of hush that swallows screams before they're born. What happened in the Lawson farmhouse that day would become the most haunting family annihilation in Appalachian history. A massacre so complete that an entire bloodline was erased before the turkey went cold. The dirt road leading to Charlie Lawson's tobacco farm had frozen overnight, each rut preserved like a fossil record. By dawn on December 25th, neighbors would notice something wrong, not from what they heard, but from what they didn't. No children's laughter, no smoke from the breakfast fire, just the metallic smell of winter air and something else. Something copper-sweet drifting from the direction of the barn. Charlie Lawson was 43 years old that Christmas, a tenant farmer who'd clawed his way to modest prosperity through tobacco and sheer Appalachian stubbornness. His wife Fanny was 37. Together they'd built something resembling the American dream in the foothills. 7 children, ranging from 17-year-old Arthur down to baby Mary Lou, just 4 months old. To their neighbors in Stokes County, they seemed ordinary, hard-working, God-fearing. They had no idea what was festering behind Charlie's increasingly hollow stare. The week before Christmas, Charlie had done something unusual. He'd loaded the entire family into his truck, all 9 of them, and driven to Germantown to have their photograph taken. Not just any photograph. He'd purchased new clothes for everyone first, spending money the family could barely afford. Matching outfits, as if preparing them for something. The photographer would later remember how stiff they all looked, how Charlie insisted on multiple poses, how he kept adjusting his own position, as though trying to memorize where everyone stood. That photograph would become the last image of the Lawson family alive. Before we go deeper, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. If you're already hooked by this story, hit that like button and subscribe, because what comes next gets darker still. On Christmas Eve, neighbors reported seeing Charlie chopping wood behind the house well past midnight. The rhythmic thud of the axe carried across the frozen fields, steady, mechanical, relentless. Later, they'd wonder what he'd been thinking during those solitary hours. Whether he'd already made his decision, whether the wood he was splitting was preparation or rehearsal. Christmas morning arrived with temperatures hovering just below freezing. The Lawsons should have been gathered around their modest tree, the children tearing into whatever small gifts their parents had managed. Instead, something broke loose in Charlie Lawson's mind. Or perhaps something that had been breaking for months finally shattered completely. The first indication that December 25th, 1929, would be different came around 9 a.m. Charlie sent his 2 middle sons, Arthur and 16-year-old James, into town on an errand, getting them away from the house, clearing the stage for what would come next. With the boys gone, Charlie retrieved his 12-gauge shotgun. Fanny was in the house with the younger children. 17-year-old Marie was helping her mother. The little ones, Carrie, Maybelle, Raymond, and baby Mary Lou, were playing, their voices bright with Christmas excitement. They never saw it coming. What Charlie Lawson did in the next 30 minutes would traumatize an entire region for generations. But the mechanics of the massacre, horrifying as they are, tell only half the story. The real mystery isn't what happened in that farmhouse. It's why a man who'd shown no previous signs of violence, who neighbors described as stern but decent, who'd just spent precious money on a family portrait, suddenly decided to erase his entire bloodline from existence. And here's what makes your blood run cold. When Arthur and James returned from their errand an hour later, they found their father waiting in the barn, the shotgun across his lap, surrounded by Arthur Lawson was 17 years old when he walked into a nightmare disguised as Christmas morning. Understanding what the Lawson boys found requires understanding what Charlie had methodically constructed, a tableau of death arranged with chilling precision across the farm's landscape. The tobacco barn sat roughly 50 yards from the main house, its weathered planks gaps wide enough to let winter wind whistle through. Arthur heard it first, not his father's voice, but the absence of all the sounds that should have filled Christmas morning. No baby crying, no mother calling the family to breakfast. Just the creak of frozen wood and his own footsteps crunching through snow that hadn't been disturbed except by one set of tracks leading from the house to the barn and back again, over and over, like some grim pilgrimage. Charlie Lawson sat slumped against a fence post inside the barn, the shotgun positioned beneath his chin. The single shot had been fired at an upward angle, quick, efficient, final. Blood had pooled in the straw beneath him, already freezing in the December cold. But it was what Arthur saw cradled in his father's arms that stopped his heart. Baby Mary Lou, 4 months old, her small body still dressed in the new Christmas outfit from their family photograph. She'd been shot first, in the house, before Charlie carried her to the barn like a prize. Arthur's scream brought his brother James running. What the two young men did next, walking back toward the farmhouse despite every instinct screaming at them to run, represents a kind of courage that deserves recognition even in the midst of horror. They had to know. They had to see. The main house door stood open. Snow had begun to drift across the threshold. Inside, the scene defied comprehension. Fanny Lawson lay in the front room, her body positioned with unnatural care. Charlie had shot his wife, then arranged her corpse with her arms crossed over her chest, a clean cloth placed over her face. The same ritualistic staging marked each victim, as though Charlie was preparing them not for death, but for viewing, for judgment, for some final accounting only he understood. Marie, the eldest daughter, was found in the same room, 17 years old, engaged to be married the following spring. She'd been shot while trying to shield her younger siblings. Investigators would later determine she'd taken the first blast and still had her arms outstretched when the second shot killed her. Death came dressed in familiar clothing. The younger children, Carrie, age 12, Maybelle, 7, and Raymond, 4, had been killed in a back bedroom. Charlie had hunted them methodically, reloading the shotgun between victims. Small handprints on the walls suggested at least one child had tried to climb out a window. The window was nailed shut. Charlie had prepared for that too. 7 people murdered, 8 counting Charlie himself. An entire family erased between breakfast and lunch on the day meant to celebrate birth and redemption. But here's what transformed this from tragedy to legend. Arthur and James didn't call the police immediately. Instead, they ran to the nearest neighbor's farm, the home of Charlie's brother Marion Lawson, 3/4 of a mile away. And Marion, upon hearing what his nephews described, made a decision that would haunt the investigation forever. He told them to wait, to not touch anything, to let him see for himself first. Why would Marion Lawson need to see for himself before involving authorities? What was he looking for in that farmhouse that made him delay the investigation by precious hours? The official record remains silent, but decades later, family members would whisper about a letter, a confession Charlie supposedly left explaining everything. A letter that Marion found and destroyed before police arrived. By the time Sheriff W.D. Folger reached the Lawson farm that afternoon, word had spread through Stokes County like wildfire. Dozens of neighbors and curiosity seekers had already contaminated the scene, tracking through the house, picking up objects, disturbing evidence. The sheriff found himself trying to investigate a massacre that had already been compromised by the community itself. People who couldn't resist the magnetic pull of horror, who needed to witness the unwitnessable. Would you have looked away? Or would you have walked through that door like everyone else, unable to resist the dark gravity of knowing? The Stokes County coroner, Dr. H.A. Holder, arrived at 4:30 p.m. His official report listed 8 deaths by shotgun manner. Homicide-suicide. Time of death estimated between 9 and 10 a.m., but Dr. Holder noted something in his report that wouldn't be widely discussed until years later. Fanny Lawson showed signs of having been dead longer than the children. Charlie had killed his wife first, then waited, perhaps an hour, perhaps more, before systematically executing his children. What was he thinking during that interval? What was he waiting for? The bodies were removed by nightfall, loaded onto wagons and taken to Germantown for preparation. But the questions had only just 3,000 people attended the Lawson family funeral, more than the entire population of Germantown. This wasn't grief drawing the crowds. It was something darker, a collective need to bear witness to catastrophe that transcended simple mourning and entered the realm of spectacle. The funeral took place on December 28, 1929, at the Browder and Son Funeral Home in Germantown. Undertakers had worked around the clock to prepare 8 bodies for viewing, an almost impossible task given the nature of their deaths. They'd done their best with reconstruction, with cosmetics, with careful positioning. But no amount of preparation could hide what had happened. The caskets, 7 white for the children and victims, 1 dark for Charlie, were arranged in a semicircle inside the funeral home. The same configuration as the family photograph taken just days before. People lined up for hours in freezing temperatures to file past. They came from Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, some traveling for 2 days just to see the bodies. Local newspapers described women fainting, men weeping openly, children lifted by their parents to peer into the caskets, as though the sight of murdered innocents might inoculate them against future horrors. The Reverend T.J. Green delivered the eulogy. His words, preserved in the Winston-Salem Journal, avoided the obvious questions. We cannot know the mind of man when darkness takes hold. We can only pray for mercy upon souls departed, both innocent and fallen. Even the preacher wouldn't speak the real question aloud. Why did Charlie Lawson do it? Sheriff Folger had spent 3 days interviewing everyone who'd known the family. He'd searched the farmhouse top to bottom, examined Charlie's financial records, questioned neighbors about disputes or threats. The investigation yielded nothing. No money troubles beyond the normal strain of tenant farming. No known enemies. No history of violence or mental instability. Charlie Lawson had been, by all accounts, unremarkable, until the morning he became unforgettable. But people don't slaughter their families without reason. The human mind recoils from randomness, demands narrative, insists on cause preceding effect. And so the theories began, each one an attempt to impose logic onto the illogical, to find the crack where evil seeped in. Theory 1. Economic desperation. The stock market had crashed 2 months earlier, in October of 1929. The Great Depression was tightening its grip on rural America. Perhaps Charlie saw starvation coming and decided murder was mercy, a permanent solution to temporary suffering. But his tobacco crop had sold well that fall. He'd had enough money for new clothes and a professional photograph. The family wasn't wealthy, but they weren't starving either. Theory 2. Religious mania. Several neighbors mentioned that Charlie had become increasingly withdrawn in the months before Christmas, that he'd stopped attending church services at the Germantown Baptist congregation where the family had worshipped for years. Had he experienced some kind of apocalyptic vision? Believed God commanded him to act? But no religious writings were found, no Bible passages marked, no indication of the fevered certainty that typically accompanies divine delusion. Theory 3. Medical explanation. A brain tumor, perhaps, or undiagnosed schizophrenia manifesting in middle age. Dr. Holder's autopsy of Charlie noted no obvious abnormalities, but neurological examination in 1929 was primitive at best. Something could have been growing in Charlie's brain, pressing against the parts that regulate impulse control, that separate thought from action. But this explanation felt too clean, too convenient. A way of saying monsters aren't real, only malfunctioning meat. And then there was the theory nobody wanted to say out loud. 3 weeks after the funeral, a rumor began circulating through Stokes County. It started as whispers between women at the general store, then spread to men gathered outside the tobacco auctions. The rumor claimed that 17-year-old Marie, Charlie's eldest daughter, the one engaged to be married, had been pregnant. Not by her fiancé, by her father. The story went like this. Charlie had been molesting Marie for years. When she finally became pregnant in late 1929, she'd threatened to expose him. The upcoming wedding would make her condition obvious. The family photograph was Charlie's way of preserving a final image of respectability before he destroyed the evidence. All of it. Everyone who knew or might discover his secret. It would explain the timing, the methodical preparation, the particular care Charlie took in arranging Marie's body, as though seeking forgiveness or offering apology. It would explain why he killed Fanny first. Perhaps she knew and confronted him, or perhaps he couldn't bear to see her face when the truth came out. It would explain everything. Except there was no proof. Dr. Holder hadn't performed an autopsy on Marie, and by the time the rumor reached official ears, she'd been buried for weeks in frozen ground. No one wanted to exhume a murdered teenager's body on the basis of gossip. The investigation had already concluded. The coroner had filed his report. Charlie's brother Marion, when asked directly by a reporter from the Danbury Reporter, denied everything and threatened legal action against anyone spreading vile lies about the departed. That same brother who'd delayed calling police, who'd entered the farmhouse before authorities arrived, who family members swore had found and destroyed a letter. What did that letter say? Did it confess to incest? Did it explain why Charlie spent their scarce money on new clothes and a photograph? Did it apologize, justify, or simply state facts without emotion? We'll never know. Marion Lawson took that secret to his grave in 1952, and the few family members still living refuse to discuss it even now, nearly a century later. But here's what we do know. Within a year of the massacre, the Lawson farmhouse became a tourist attraction. People paid 25 cents to walk through the rooms where the murders occurred, to stand in the spots where bodies fell, to touch the walls and door frames, as though violence leaves a residue that can be absorbed through skin. The farm's owner, recognizing profit in tragedy, kept the house exactly as it had been found. Bloodstains on the floor, bullet holes in the walls. The Christmas tree still standing in the corner, needles brown and brittle, presents never opened gathering dust beneath its branches. For 15 years, thousands paid to gawk at death. And then one night in 1944, the farmhouse burned to the ground. The flames that consumed the Lawson farmhouse on a February night in 1944 were ruled accidental, but nobody in Stokes County believed it. By the time the volunteer fire brigade arrived from Germantown, the structure was already collapsing into its own foundation, sending sparks spiraling into the winter darkness like angry spirits finally released from captivity. The fire started around 2 a.m. Investigators determined the blaze originated in the front room, the exact spot where Fanny Lawson's body had been found 15 years earlier. No electrical wiring ran through that section of the house. No lanterns or heating sources were present. The structure had been empty for hours, locked tight after the last paying visitor left at dusk. Yet somehow, in the dead of night, flames erupted with such intensity that the entire building was engulfed within minutes. Arson was suspected, but never proven. The property owner collected insurance money and sold the land to a timber company within the month, eager to be rid of an asset that had transformed from profitable curiosity to cursed liability. But you can't burn away memory. You can only change its form. The dead don't need houses to haunt. With the physical site destroyed, the Lawson massacre migrated into folklore. It became the story mothers told to keep teenage daughters close to home. The cautionary tale shared in barbershops and church basements. The legend that defined Stokes County as surely as any historical marker or monument. And legends, unlike facts, grow in the telling. By the 1950s, people swore they'd seen Charlie Lawson's ghost walking the old tobacco road on Christmas mornings, shotgun cradled in his arms, searching for something he'd lost. Hunters reported hearing children's laughter coming from the woods where the farmhouse once stood. Laughter that turned to screams when you got close enough to investigate. The Madison Methodist Church, where the family had been members, experienced a string of unexplained incidents. Hymnals opened to pages about judgment and damnation, baptismal water turning red overnight, the church organ playing by itself during thunderstorms. Were these genuine supernatural occurrences or the brain's need to make sense of senseless violence by wrapping it in ghost stories and superstition? The distinction hardly matters. The effect was real enough. An entire community traumatized not just by what happened, but by their inability to understand why. Local historian Trudy Smith spent 30 years researching the Lawson case, interviewing surviving relatives and neighbors who'd been children in 1929. Her unpublished manuscript, housed in the Stokes County Historical Society archives, contains a detail that never made it into official reports. According to Smith's interviews, Charlie Lawson had consulted a traveling root doctor, a folk healer who practiced a blend of Appalachian herb lore and African-American hoodoo in the fall of 1929. Multiple sources confirmed Charlie had paid the man for a remedy of some kind, though what ailment he sought to cure remained unclear. The root doctor left Stokes County shortly before Christmas and was never tracked down for questioning. Had Charlie been seeking a cure for his own dark impulses? A way to silence the voices commanding him to act? Or had he been asking for something else entirely? Perhaps a potion to end a pregnancy, to erase evidence, to solve a problem that seemed unsolvable by conventional means. The root doctor angle opens another possibility, that Charlie Lawson was aware something was wrong inside his own head, that he felt the violence building like pressure behind a dam and sought help from the only source available to a poor farmer who couldn't afford doctors or asylums, that he tried to stop himself and failed. Does that make what he did more understandable or more horrifying? Arthur and James Lawson, the two sons who survived by being sent away on an errand, lived the rest of their lives under the weight of impossible questions. Why had their father spared them? Was it mercy or cruelty to be left alive, the sole inheritors of a legacy built on blood? Arthur moved to Virginia, changed his surname, and refused to discuss his family for 40 years. When a reporter finally tracked him down in 1969, Arthur agreed to a single interview. His words, preserved on a crackling reel-to-reel tape in the Library of Congress, are haunting in their simplicity. People always ask if I saw it coming, if Dad seemed different that morning. The truth is, he seemed different for months before. But different how? He was quieter, looked at us longer, like he was memorizing our faces. I thought it meant he loved us more. I thought it meant we were finally everything he'd worked for. I was 17 years old, and I thought I understood the look in my father's eyes. I didn't understand anything. James, the younger brother, never left Stokes County. He married, had children of his own, worked as a mechanic in Germantown. But according to family members, James never celebrated Christmas again. Every December 25th until his death in 1983, James spent the day alone, sitting in his truck on the dirt road that used to lead to the family farm, staring at the empty fields where his siblings died. What do you do with grief that has no resolution? With trauma that has no closure? With questions that have no answers? You pass them down, generation to generation. Until the massacre stops being about the Lawson family specifically and becomes about something larger, about the darkness that can fester in any family, behind any closed door, underneath any veneer of normalcy. The Lawson story became a staple of Appalachian murder ballads. Multiple versions emerged in the 1930s and 40s, each adding new details, new theories, new verses that tried to explain the unexplainable through melody and rhyme. The most popular version, recorded by the Carolina Buddies in 1930, includes this verse. They say it was a secret, that Charlie couldn't bear a sin too dark for daylight, a burden none could share. He tried to wash it clean with blood, with bullet, flame, and knife, but some stains don't come out, no matter who you take in sacrifice. The song never specifies what secret. It doesn't have to. Listeners fill in the blanks with their own darkest suspicions, and the legend grows another layer, another interpretation, another theory to explain why a father would. In 2006, a construction crew breaking ground for a new subdivision 3 miles from the old Lawson farm made a discovery that reopened questions everyone assumed were buried forever. The crew's backhoe struck something solid 18 inches below the topsoil. Not rock, but a metal box roughly the size of a briefcase, its surface corroded by 77 years underground, but still intact. Inside were letters, dozens of them, wrapped in oilcloth, written in a careful, measured hand. Charlie Lawson's hand. The construction foreman, a man named Dale Hutchins with no connection to the case, initially thought he'd stumbled onto someone's time capsule or buried treasure. It wasn't until he opened the first letter and saw the date, December 10th, 1929, that he realized what he was holding. He immediately contacted the Stokes County Sheriff's Department, and within hours, the box was in the custody of state investigators. What those letters contained has never been fully disclosed to the public. The Lawson family descendants filed an emergency injunction to seal the documents, citing privacy concerns. The case went to court, and in a decision that enraged true crime enthusiasts and frustrated historians, a judge ruled that the letters qualified as personal family correspondence and granted the injunction. The documents remain sealed in the North Carolina State Archives, accessible only to verified family members and law enforcement. But details leaked. They always do. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. According to sources close to the investigation, who spoke anonymously to the Winston-Salem Journal in 2007. The letters were addressed to various people: Fanny, Marie, Arthur, even baby Mary Lou. They were written over a period of several weeks in late 1929, drafted and revised multiple times, as though Charlie was struggling to find the right words for the unspeakable. The letters to his wife allegedly contained repeated apologies for failing to protect the family, though from what threat remained unclear. The letters to Marie were described as deeply disturbing by one investigator, containing language that suggested an inappropriate relationship, though whether this constituted confession of incest or simply awkward paternal affection filtered through modern interpretation is hotly debated. Most significantly, one letter addressed to whoever finds this supposedly outlined Charlie's reasoning. Not a justification, but an explanation. And according to the leaked accounts, that explanation wasn't about pregnancy or incest at all. It was about debt. Not financial debt, but a different kind. A debt Charlie believed he owed to something he referred to only as the arrangement, or the bargain. The letter allegedly described how Charlie had made a promise years earlier, during a particularly brutal winter when the family was starving, when his tobacco crop failed and 2 of his children were sick with fever. He'd gone into the woods, the specific location never mentioned, and made a deal with something he encountered there. Prosperity in exchange for payment. Success in exchange for sacrifice. And in December of 1929, whatever Charlie had made his bargain with came to collect. Sound insane? It should. But consider, this is Appalachia, where folk magic and old beliefs run deeper than any church doctrine. Where stories of deals at the crossroads and debts to the darkness predate European settlement. Where even now, locals speak carefully about certain places in the mountains, certain trees you don't cut down, certain paths you don't walk at night. Did Charlie Lawson actually encounter something supernatural in those woods? Or did his mind, cracking under pressure from whatever secret he was keeping, incest, abuse, some other horror, construct a narrative that allowed him to believe he had no choice? That he was merely fulfilling an obligation rather than making a decision? The answer changes nothing about what happened. 7 people still died. An entire bloodline was still erased. But it changes how we understand the man who did it. Whether he was monster, victim, or something more complicated that defies easy categorization. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychologist who analyzed the case for her 2012 book, Family Annihilators, a psychological profile, noted that Charlie's behavior in the weeks before the murders showed classic signs of someone preparing for an inevitable event. The family photograph, the new clothes, the methodical planning. These weren't the actions of someone in the grip of sudden psychotic break, but rather someone following a predetermined script. Whether that script was written by mental illness, by guilt over abuse, or by genuine belief in a supernatural debt doesn't ultimately matter, Dr. Chen wrote. Charlie Lawson believed he had no choice, and that belief made him capable of the unthinkable. The discovery of the letters sparked renewed interest in the case. Documentary crews descended on Stokes County. Podcasters interviewed distant relatives. Metal detector enthusiasts combed the woods hoping to find more buried evidence. The Lawson family descendants, thrust unwillingly back into the spotlight, released a terse statement through their lawyer. Our family has suffered enough. These were real people, not characters in a horror story. We ask that their memory be respected and their privacy honored. No good comes from digging up the past. But the past in this case had literally been dug up, and once exposed, it refused to be reburied. Local paranormal investigation groups began conducting overnight vigils at the site where the farmhouse once stood. They reported the usual array of questionable evidence: electronic voice phenomena, unexplained cold spots, photographs with supposed orbs, and shadow figures. Skeptics dismissed it all as wishful thinking and confirmation bias. Believers insisted something malevolent still lingered in that ground, anchored by violence too profound to simply dissipate with time. In 2008, a developer announced plans to build a memorial park on the site. The project was immediately controversial. Supporters argued it would provide a dignified space for remembrance and education. Opponents felt it was ghoulish, an attempt to profit from tragedy. Construction began in 2009, 80 years after the murders. 3 workers quit the first week, claiming tools went missing. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, and they felt watched while on site. The project manager dismissed their concerns as superstition until a freak accident sent a 2x4 through his truck windshield. While the truck was parked, locked, with no workers nearby, and no wind strong enough to propel lumber. The memorial park was never completed. The land sits empty today, marked only by a historical plaque that provides the barest facts. The Lawson family lived here. They died on Christmas 1929. 8 people lost their lives. It doesn't mention the letters, doesn't speculate about motive, doesn't acknowledge the decades of folklore and fear that grew from this soil like poisoned fruit. Perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some stories resist conclusion, defy explanation, exist only in the space between what we know and what we suspect. Perhaps the Lawson Massacre isn't meant to be solved. Only Madison, North Carolina, 93 years after the Lawson murders, and the family name still carries weight heavy enough to bend conversations. This is how trauma calcifies into identity, how a single day's horror becomes the defining characteristic of a place and the people who remain tethered to it. Local teacher Patricia Hanks grew up 3 miles from the old Lawson property in the 1970s and 80s. Her grandmother had been friends with Fanny Lawson, had visited the farmhouse just 2 weeks before Christmas of 1929. In a 2019 interview with the Stokes News, Hanks described how the massacre shaped her entire childhood. "We weren't allowed to celebrate Christmas the way other families did. My grandmother said it felt disrespectful, like dancing on graves. So we had a tree, we had presents, but there was always this shadow over everything. This awareness that the day everyone else saw as joyful had been the worst day in our community's history. I didn't understand it as a child. I do now." The Lawson case created a template for how rural communities process mass family violence. With a mixture of horror, fascination, and the uncomfortable recognition that evil doesn't announce itself, doesn't arrive with warning signs visible to everyone. Charlie Lawson was their neighbor, their fellow church member, the man who sold them tobacco and borrowed their tools and waved from his truck on the dirt roads they all traveled. If he could do it, anyone could. Evil looks like everyone else until the moment it doesn't. The psychological impact extended beyond just those who knew the family. Dr. Leonard Shaw, a sociologist at Wake Forest University, conducted a study in the 1990s examining multi-generational trauma in communities affected by family annihilation cases. Stokes County was his primary research site, and his findings were sobering. Children born decades after the Lawson murders showed measurably higher rates of anxiety around Christmas holidays compared to control groups from neighboring counties. Parents in the area were significantly more likely to exhibit hypervigilance about their children's safety and their spouse's mental health. Divorce rates in Stokes County ran 15% higher than state averages. Dr. Shaw theorized that the Lawson case had embedded a cultural anxiety about trusting family members completely, about assuming you truly know the people you live with. Trauma becomes cultural when it's transmitted through storytelling, Dr. Shaw wrote. And in Stokes County, the Lawson story is unavoidable. It's in the ballads, the ghost tales, the warnings parents give children. Be good, or you'll end up like the Lawsons. Don't trust anyone completely. Look what Charlie did. The massacre has been metabolized into the community's DNA. But perhaps the most disturbing ripple effect is this. The Lawson case inspired copycats. In 1951, a farmer in nearby Surrey County murdered his wife and 4 children with a shotgun on Christmas Eve, then killed himself. His suicide note referenced following Charlie's path to peace. In 1978, a father in Virginia killed his family 2 days before Christmas, leaving behind a partial transcript of a Lawson murder ballad. In 2003, investigators working a family murder-suicide in Tennessee found internet search history on the killer's computer. Searches for Lawson family murders, why Charlie Lawson killed his family, and how to make it quick. The idea of family annihilation as solution, as mercy, as inevitable tragedy rather than preventable crime. These concepts took root and spread like kudzu across the region, nourished by the Lawson story's enduring presence in collective memory. Can a story kill? Can a legend become lethal? The question isn't rhetorical. In 2015, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit conducted a study of family annihilators and found that 43% of perpetrators in the southeastern United States referenced or demonstrated awareness of the Lawson case. The study's lead researcher, Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Wade, noted, "The Lawson murders function as a kind of cultural permission structure. These men, and they're almost always men, see Charlie Lawson as someone who faced an impossible situation and took decisive action. They don't see him as a monster. They see him as someone who understood what needed to be done and had the courage to do it. That's terrifying." The descendants of Arthur and James Lawson, the surviving sons, have struggled with this legacy in different ways. Some changed their names and moved far from North Carolina, desperate to escape association with the massacre. Others stayed, determined to reclaim the Lawson name from infamy, to insist that one man's actions shouldn't define an entire bloodline. In 2017, a great-great-grandniece of Arthur Lawson named Emma Pritchard launched a website called the Lawson Legacy Project. Its stated mission: to humanize the victims, to share memories and photographs of who Fanny, Marie, and the children were before December 25th became their eternal identity. To remind people that they were individuals with dreams and personalities and futures that were stolen, not just props in a tragedy. The website includes a page of remembrances collected from elderly residents who knew the family. Small details that never made it into sensational retellings. Marie loved to sing hymns while hanging laundry. Carrie was learning to read and carried her primer everywhere. Raymond had a pet rabbit named Snowball. Baby Mary Lou had just started smiling when you tickled her feet. These aren't the details that sell books or generate clicks. They don't satisfy the hunger for explanation that drives our obsession with true crime. But they're the details that matter. The insistence that before there were victims, there were people. "We can't undo what happened," Pritchard wrote on the site. "We can't answer why, but we can refuse to let the worst moment of their lives be the only moment that's remembered. We can say their names and mean more than just the people Charlie Lawson killed." It's a noble effort, But the reality is that public memory doesn't work that way. We remember disruption, not normalcy. Violence, not mundane joy. The story we tell about the Lawsons isn't really about them at all. It's about our need to believe we'd see the warning signs, that we'd act differently, that we're fundamentally safe from the people we love. The Lawson Massacre challenges that comfort. It insists that sometimes there are no warning signs visible to anyone except the person planning atrocity. That love and violence can coexist in the same heart until one day they can't, and everything collapses into a single Christmas morning where snow falls silent and a family disappears into history's darkest corners. In 2022, the Kentucky Museum of True Crime attempted to acquire the family photograph, the one taken a week before the murders, the last image of them all together. The asking price from the private collector who owned it was $50,000. The museum raised $43,000 through crowdfunding before the Lawson descendants filed a lawsuit to block the sale, arguing that displaying their murdered relatives for entertainment purposes violated their dignity and privacy rights. The case is still in litigation. The photograph remains in private hands, and the debate continues. Who owns tragedy? Who has the right to tell these stories, to profit from them, to keep them alive in cultural memory? There are no good answers. Only the certainty that the Lawson family, the Madison dry goods store, still stands on the same corner where Charlie Lawson bought those Christmas outfits in December of 1929, though it's been a coffee shop since 2012. The current owner, a transplant from Charlotte named Beth Morrison, didn't know the building's history when she signed the lease. She learned fast. Customers kept asking if she'd experienced anything unusual. Workers refused to open or close alone. A barista quit after her third shift, claiming she heard children singing Christmas carols in the storage room, the exact location where the old dry goods section used to be, where Charlie would have browsed those matching outfits that became burial clothes. Morrison installed security cameras, thinking she had a vandalism problem. What the footage showed was stranger than breaking and entering. Doors opening by themselves at precisely 9:47 a.m. every December 25th. The same time, year after year. No wind, no mechanical explanation. Just the door swinging open as though someone was walking through, then closing again 30 seconds later. I don't believe in ghosts, Morrison said in a 2023 podcast interview. But I believe in whatever those cameras recorded. And I believe there's something about this place, about this whole area, that doesn't let go of what happened. She's not wrong. The Lawson Massacre has become woven into the landscape itself, inscribed in the topography as surely as the creek beds and tobacco fields. Drive through Stokes County today, and people will point out landmarks. That's where the farmhouse was. That's the church where the funeral happened. That's the road Charlie's ghost walks on Christmas morning. Tourist interest has only intensified with time. The rise of true crime podcasts and YouTube documentaries brought a new generation of murder enthusiasts to Madison, armed with cameras and recorders, hoping to capture evidence of lingering paranormal activity or uncover details the historical record missed. Local businesses have adapted. The Madison Inn advertises Lawson Massacre tours, and you can buy Lawson family memorabilia at the Historical Society gift shop. Postcards of the famous photograph, copies of the murder ballads, even replicas of the newspaper front pages from December 26, 1929. It's ghoulish. It's also economically necessary for a rural area where tobacco income has dried up and manufacturing jobs never arrived. The Lawson Massacre is one of the few things that brings outside money into Stokes County. The dead have become the region's most reliable export. But what about the questions that still won't die? Was Marie Lawson pregnant with her father's child? The incest theory remains the most persistent, repeated in virtually every documentary and article about the case. Yet there's never been definitive proof. No autopsy, no medical records, nothing beyond rumor and circumstantial interpretation of Charlie's behavior. In 2020, a forensic genealogist offered to conduct DNA analysis if Marie's body could be exhumed, comparing her remains to those of her surviving relatives to determine if there were genetic anomalies consistent with incestuous conception. The family refused. Some answers, they argued, weren't worth the violation of desecrating a murder victim's grave. Did Charlie Lawson make a supernatural bargain? The letters allegedly describing the arrangement have never been independently verified. Even the leaked details could be exaggeration or misinterpretation. And yet, this theory resonates in Appalachia in ways outsiders struggle to understand. In a region where folk beliefs persist alongside Baptist fundamentalism, where people still consult water witches and avoid certain mountains after dark, the idea of Charlie owing a debt to something older and darker than Christian theology doesn't seem absurd. It seems like one more story about the price people pay for survival in hard country. Was he simply mentally ill? A man whose brain betrayed him into believing he had no choice? This is the most likely explanation, the one psychiatrists and criminal profilers gravitate toward. But it's also the least satisfying, because it makes Charlie Lawson pathetic rather than monstrous. We want our killers to be evil by choice, motivated by comprehensible sins like greed or lust or rage. We don't want them to be victims of their own malfunctioning neurology, because that implies the capacity for such violence exists in anyone whose brain chemistry shifts wrong. The truth is probably simpler and more terrible than any theory. Charlie Lawson was a human being. He loved his family. He also killed them. Both things are simultaneously true, and the cognitive dissonance that creates is what makes this case impossible to forget, impossible to process, impossible to file away as an aberration that couldn't happen again. Because it can. It does. Family annihilation cases occur roughly once every 5 days in the United States, according to FBI statistics. Most never reach the level of notoriety the Lawson massacre achieved, but they follow similar patterns. Father as killer, economic stress as trigger, murder-suicide as outcome. The Lawson case isn't unique. It's simply the most remembered example of something that happens with horrifying regularity. In October of 2024, researchers from Duke University conducted an archaeological survey of the old Lawson property, using ground-penetrating radar to search for anything else Charlie might have buried. More letters, evidence, answers. They found nothing but undisturbed soil and the ghosts of old fence posts marking where the tobacco fields used to be. Perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps the Lawson massacre resists solution because there is no solution, only endless interpretation, endless theorizing, endless attempts to extract meaning from meaninglessness. The last surviving person with direct memory of the Lawson family was a woman named Gladys Parker, who died in 2019 at age 97. She'd been 11 years old in 1929, living on the neighboring farm. She'd played with the Lawson children, attended the same one-room schoolhouse, sat behind Marie in church. Before her death, Parker gave a final interview to a documentary crew. Her words, filmed just 3 months before she passed, serve as perhaps the closest thing to closure this story will ever have. People always want to know if Charlie seemed different, if there were signs we missed. And I've spent 90 years thinking about that. The truth? He seemed like a father. That's all. He yelled at his kids when they misbehaved. He laughed at jokes. He worked hard. There was nothing special about him. Nothing that marked him as different from any other man trying to keep his family fed during hard times. And that's what scares people, I think. That evil doesn't announce itself. That the person who destroys everything can be the same person who built it. That we're all, every one of us, capable of more than we want to admit. She paused then, looking directly at the camera, and added, I still dream about them sometimes. The Lawson children. We'd be playing in the creek, catching crawdads, and everything would be normal. Then I'd wake up and remember they've been dead longer than they were ever alive. And I'd think, is that what death is? Just becoming somebody else's nightmare? Somebody else's mystery to solve? I hope not. I hope somewhere, somehow, they're still just children playing by a creek, and none of the rest of it ever happened. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even darker. Subscribe before it drops.